But we decided to start this this program with talking about startup ecosystems because we think that this is something that a lot of people talk about, but not a whole lot of people understand what an ecosystem is. So we really we think that we really should actually really understand what the map is, the startup land map is. And probably the best place to start is looking at all the various participants of the startup ecosystem. So why is it called an ecosystem? Why is it this this kind of strange name? Well, actually, various parts of the economy are all ecosystems. You know, since I don't know, turn of the century. There are various participants with various intents and kind of differing motivations, but they all cooperate, collaborate, and contribute to the same system. And that's what really an ecosystem is about. There are all various players. They are all good at something, and that something is a factor, is a skill, is an element that the others need. So that's why we call it an ecosystem. Now, in case of startups, a startup is an organization that is just about to, as the name suggests, start its economic life. It is important to understand that there is an environment around these very, very early forms of companies that actually make their life possible. So when we are talking about the startup ecosystem, we typically think of this kind of macro level view. In this macro level view, there are, as you can see, those little bubbles around that circle. Those bubbles contain organizations and entities. These are institutions, more or less. In the middle, in the light blue section, those are more or less individuals. Those individuals and their ideas that are sort of loosely connected to all these other institutions. So let's go through what these institutions are. Large established companies. Well, number one, you know, it doesn't matter actually in what order we talk about them. Number one is big corporations. These big corporations are the companies who are very acquainted with markets, very well acquainted with them. They understand what motivates participants in the marketplace, how to sell goods and products to the general public. Those are the ones who actually have deep understanding of various industries. Next, universities. Typically, universities are in the business of research and development. A large number of them are in research and development. Some others are, you know, regular business universities. Now, there are a lot of talent. There is a lot of young talent, you know, studying at these universities, sometimes conducting experiments and research. And also there are more applied research at these universities at a higher level, where the master's students and the PhD students are actually conducting research and experiments, which very often result in some new technologies, which actually is looking for its way to the marketplace. So the universities are an important source for technologies and source of ideas, and to a limited extent, source of talent. Typically, they are technical talent, but very often they don't find their way to the market. So again, they are a part of the ecosystem, but they are not operating, you know, separately, operating in a vacuum. Now, there is another kind of organization called funding organizations. Well, these are typically government organizations in this part of the world, sometimes government-related organizations that are sort of working in the background under the supervision of ministries. And these are also sometimes organizations that are semi-private. They receive money from the government, but they mix it with some private capital so that they introduce some sort of kind of a market control in the way they are operating, and they are funding startups. So these funding organizations are not necessarily private, but not necessarily 100% public either. in this part of the world. Some of them are operating on a grant basis, others are operating under market conditions. Overall, by 2021, we can say that large number of them are operating under market conditions, and they are actually trying to make all that research that I mentioned before in universities and all that market understanding that is at large corporations, find the way to small teams, small, enthusiastic, and talented teams to form new organizations, which are called startups. Now, service providers is the next large player that we indicated here on this chart. Service providers are those who are actually providing services that are needed for a startup only for a limited period of time. These are typically lawyers, mergers and acquisition advisors, mentors, people who are actually trying to help startups, which technology to adopt, which methodology to use to get to market. They are not needed for 100% of the life of the startup, but they are very, very needed for a short period of time. That's why they're called the service providers. Kind of advisors would be probably another good name for them. Now, there are research organizations. That's the next one. Research organizations are those who are not 100% directly affiliated with universities. They are mostly government owned, and they are focusing on one particular industry or one particular technology. These research organizations are very often technical. Again, a lot of technology, a lot of new research is accumulating there that can be put to use in the marketplace, but they are not really prepared to do that by themselves. And then the last one is the so-called support organizations. Now, what can support organizations do? Well, I mean, if you look at this so-called ecosystem flower, there are the corporates, universities, funding organizations, service providers, research organizations. Well, somebody actually has to pull it together. Somebody actually has to kind of make it in a kind of general offering, so that startups and entrepreneurs and young companies, early stage companies, can actually start focusing on their work. So support organizations are the ones who actually do a function that no one else wants to do. For example, creating common spaces where entrepreneurs and startups can meet. For example, they can meet their investors. Support organizations are the ones who actually create accelerator programs, where the accelerators are supported by a certain amount of capital, so that these accelerators can later transfer that money to startups or to entrepreneurs. So support organizations actually try to create activities for startups and among startups and other players in the ecosystem. Now, in the middle, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there are these kind of ideas and entrepreneurs. Those are really the ones that matter in a startup ecosystem. Those are the ones that all the others try to help and try to promote. At the very heart of every startup, there is an entrepreneur. This sort of the engine, the person who is actually making the most contribution. So basically, the role of every player in the startup ecosystem at the end of the day is to support the entrepreneur and to support the startup in creating value. That's a very important distinction. It's not purely executing a business process and the business idea that was created 10, 20, 30 years ago. It is a very unique business function, creating value and coming up with a new idea that is going to generate benefit for the entire society. Now, a good ecosystem is actually trying to make connection among these people. As you can see, entrepreneurs, but also investors who are investing their own private money, mentors who are investing their knowledge and their business understanding, advisors who are investing their professional help, and status. So altogether, everybody is basically trying to make the entrepreneur create value. Now, the best early stage ecosystem activities, according to the practices in the last 10, 15 years, are these. Good ecosystems help entrepreneurs and people around entrepreneurs ideate. And ideation is a process in which an entrepreneur comes up with a valid idea, a new idea that is going to really create value in a unique way that has not been done before. Ideation is a sort of a free flow process. Some people are good at it, most are not. And for those who are not that good at it, there are these structured ideation events, hackathons, and actually some of them are called ideation events, and then methodologies that help sort of channel their thoughts and ideas and how an idea can become a reality. So these ideation events is one very important activity of an ecosystem. If you see that in your own ecosystem, it means that there is some good, vital energy going on in the ecosystem, so that entrepreneurs are really looking for ways to create value. Now, the other activity that good early stage ecosystems are good at is inspiration. Now, inspiration obviously should come from success. Examples of other entrepreneurs who have already created value, who have already created a company, or maybe they had a successful business exit, selling the company to a strategic investor or other buyers. That is inspiration to those who are actually just starting out, who are trying to create value and build a company. So that's why it's important for these individuals to hear these stories, to hear these cases, so that they will learn how to actually apply some of those best practices in their own life. And the third one is validation. Validation is probably the most kind of scientific of these three. Validation is when they actually come up with an idea and they say, this seems to make sense. This is something that I see this problem, I understand this problem, and I think it's valid. Now I have to come up with a solution, and a valid solution, so that solution can really solve that problem or take advantage of that opportunity. Now, that validation is also a process that can be taught and that can be learned. It's not kind of instinctive. It's very much coming through practice and learning from the best. There are a lot of good sources of information for validation. There are a lot of good practices. Usually in an ecosystem, the best practice comes from fellow entrepreneurs and from fellow practitioners, not from books and PDFs. So validation is key in order to start a business. So before any business starts, there should be a validation of the idea that actually it makes sense to start working on that particular startup. Now, these three are, in my view, and I can say that it's a sort of a general understanding, that these are sort of the best activities that an ecosystem has to do in order to flourish and in order to grow a sizable entrepreneur base. Now, as I mentioned, this is all related to the idea stage, when the ideas are sort of free floating and looking for validation. Now, once you are validated, and this slide is about places where you can learn about issues and topics related to startups. Now, these are global resources, so if you sit anywhere in Central Eastern Europe, Nordics, or anywhere in Europe or in America, these all apply. These are all sort of available through the internet. And these are basically resources that help you as an entrepreneur and an early stage company supporter learn from the best and actually connect with the best. As I mentioned, the three activities on the previous slide, those are related to the idea stage. And there are also launch stage and growth stage resources. I'm not going to go into those because, well, that requires a lot more time, but just for you to see, there are different events, different organizations, institutions focusing on different stages of startup development, and this actually helps everybody sort of orientate themselves. Kind of nobody gets bored, listening to presentations that are not really applicable to them. Again, I can't emphasize it enough that there are certain parts in a well-functioning ecosystem that has to work well. Otherwise, it's going to be sort of lopsided or distorted. But if you have these three key areas in an ecosystem, it's on the right path. One is that there are good examples, there are local idols to follow. That's clear that it's going to show a good example to all the young entrepreneurs who are just starting out. They are going to actually view these examples as people to follow. This is going to do two things. One, it's going to solidify in them the best practices. Two, it will be unlikely that they would leave the ecosystem where they grew up. So that's why local idols and idealization of sort of local good examples is very important. The other thing that also makes an ecosystem well functioning, if there are dedicated spaces, sort of like places together where startups and entrepreneurs can go and often share ideas and meet like-minded people. That's very important to create such spaces. Co-working or co-learning, it doesn't matter what we call it. It's the point is it has to be a sort of a physical closeness, which obviously now after the COVID times, now it can matter again. And the third one, when you see a good, well-functioning ecosystem, is when there are global brands. Global brands meaning global investors who are actually present in multiple places around the globe, and also global accelerators and other support organizations, sometimes co-working spaces. So when these global brands appear, it sort of signals that the ecosystem is healthy, the ecosystem has the right parts, and it's operating well, and the communication is working well among these parts, and that ecosystem kind of arrived on the sort of the international map of ecosystems. That's again very important because that is going to actually attract foreign investors and foreign entrepreneurs. So that ecosystem is going to appear on the map of the international ecosystems. Now, where can you meet startups? That's very often a question. I was talking about all these major players in the ecosystem. Clearly, these are big institutions in big office buildings, sometimes not even in the capital. Very often, existing only in the sort of abstract, in the virtual space. And well, where can you actually really interact physically with the ecosystem? Well, the best places are events, other than those co-working spaces that I mentioned earlier. These events are the places where you can actually find various kind of segments of the ecosystem. Clearly, there are those who are inspirational, as I mentioned earlier. There are those who are actually doing some training and feedback. That's validation, training on validation and feedback as a part of validation. There are many organizations. This is just an example about the Hungarian ecosystem. Many ecosystems focusing on that, but almost all ecosystems have a kind of a map and a list for these activities. Somewhere on their websites and on their virtual existence, and build first product. Those are the ones that actually already are beyond validation. They are already building some early prototypes. It doesn't mean that they are already business or they are already focusing on hosting startup businesses, but those are the ones that are more into the prototyping in the so-called MVP, minimal viable product phase. So back again to this chart. Again, the blue stuff on this slide, in my view, is really meaning communication. Communication is key, and that's probably the most important missing piece in most not well-functioning ecosystem. Communication is basically sharing their own values, their own knowledge, their own understanding, best practices, you name it, and incorporating others' best practices and opinions and feedbacks. So that's why it's key that there should be a constant forward-thinking communication within the ecosystem. This is kind of the lifeblood of such a system. It is also very important to communicate, because that is how networking and network building can occur. And clearly, if everybody is kind of waiting for the other one to start communicating, then we don't get anywhere. So that's why it's important to incorporate the sort of the give first and outward bound kind of attitude in the ecosystem. There are many such movements and kind of operating philosophies. This give first, create friends, we make friends, not contacts. Those are the kind of attitudes that many of these organizations, accelerators, and entrepreneur level organizations profess, so that the communication can start among these various members of the ecosystem. Now, another very important point about a well-functioning ecosystem, that this is a dynamic entity, which means that there can be a flow of people from, let's say, big companies to service providers or research organizations into funding organizations or into startups. So the point is that every ecosystem is based on people, not organizations necessarily. Organizations are kind of a good summation and a good aggregation of their capabilities and competencies, but fundamentally it's all based on people. And wherever those people are, they can be at a corporate, they can be at a research organization or at a venture capital. They all matter, and they all can contribute to the same ecosystem. The more they move, the more they change viewpoint, and the clearer they are going to see why each player has a different motivation and a different point of view about the ecosystem. So it's it's a welcome sign in an ecosystem if there is movement among various players at the people level. Now, there's this funny little quote at the end, what the government does in an ecosystem, and there's that, I don't know if it's a very well-known joke, but the 8 words you don't want to hear is from a government official, is that I'm from the government, I'm here to help. And that's only a joke, obviously, that this is something that is not necessarily always very helpful. And that's because, government tries to help all over the world, and they always try to help in their own way. And very often the best help is just listening, and listening to what startups, entrepreneurs, and the ecosystem wants. And in most of the cases, I've been invited to one of the largest ecosystem events in Europe. It was a couple of years ago, and one of the most important learnings of that ecosystem summit was that what the government can do the best is actually create a sort of an even playground and then leave it alone. Provide a little bit of help, but not too much, because too much help, especially too much funding, can actually make startups too comfortable, and comfort is not necessarily a good incentive for innovation. So less financial incentive and more of a sort of regulatory framework incentive is a very good idea. So that's what governments do all over the world to various extents. Now, here there is an example from our neck of the woods in Hungary, what the public economic development is doing for the Hungarian startups. You can see that, well, this is a very wide array of help and support, all the way from the ministry to the Office of the National Research and Development, which is providing a lot of funding, all the way to the Chamber of Commerce or the Input Program, which is providing direct mentorship to startups. So there are various ways that the government tries and does help, but for the most part, just a flexible regulatory framework is really what governments can do the best. Again, there are some success stories. I'm quoting the Hungarian ones. every city, every ecosystem can actually come up with this kind of a list. These are the best kind of placeholders. These are the companies that startuppers, entrepreneurs and mentors can refer to. They are setting examples. They are actually showing best practices. They are the ones who are sort of the pathfinders, and they are the ones that others should follow. And the more their experiences and their successes are aggregated and processed, the better off an ecosystem is. So at the end of the day, when we talk about ecosystems, I think one of the biggest lessons is that only people can communicate and build communities. Institutions and entities can't. That is basically sort of like a lesson of the evolution, that at the end of the day, it's always people who make a good organization and a good community. The good thing about startup ecosystems is that they really create an immense amount of value. There was a research done a couple of years ago by Kaufman Foundation, in which they quoted that more jobs were created by startups since 1980 than jobs created by corporations since the Second World War. And that's a staggering number. That it's a staggering statistics. That means that startups, they don't only innovate, but they actually activate people, and they are actually taking them and taking them to the next level, the next technology level. They're actually exposing companies and technologies to markets. They're creating markets and they're creating opportunities. So in that sense, I think that innovation in and of itself is an engine to the economy, and entrepreneurs can be really crucial parts of this engine. So much about the innovation ecosystem. I hope that you learned some of the basic points about what an ecosystem is and what it isn't, and I hope that you will be able to navigate it better next time. Thank you.